Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever felt like invisible chains are holding you back? As if unseen hands are trying to control your destiny, your peace, your health, and even your family. Today I want to tell you, there is a way to break free from every curse, every evil influence, and every shadow of witchcraft. Faith breaks invisible chains in ways that cannot always be explained with human logic, but can always be experienced in the spirit. There are battles people fight every day that cannot be seen with the natural eye. These are not chains of iron or steel, but chains of fear, depression, failure, sickness, addiction, and generational curses. They are invisible because they are spiritual in nature, yet their weight is felt as heavily as physical chains. Many live under the pressure of these unseen bondages, wondering why doors never open, why peace is stolen, and why progress feels delayed. The truth is, these chains are real, but so is the power that can break them, and that power is faith. Faith is not merely believing in something good or wishing for better days. Faith is the assurance that there is a greater hand at work, the certainty that God is bigger than every unseen prison, and the boldness to declare freedom even before the locks are opened. Faith reaches into the realm of the invisible, where evil operates and calls down divine authority to shatter every binding force. Where fear whispers that you will never be free, faith speaks with authority that freedom is already yours. Where curses claim a right to hold you, faith proclaims that weapon formed against you shall prosper. Invisible chains often tighten in silence. A person can smile on the outside, yet be bound on the inside. Some are bound by their constant anxiety, others by addictions that seem impossible to break, while some carry the weight of generational struggles that follow them like a shadow. These are not battles of flesh and blood, but of powers and principalities, and no human strength can overcome them. But faith stands as the great weapon, unseen yet undefeatable. Faith declares that what man cannot break, heaven can. Faith steps into the unseen world and commands chains to fall off because it is connected to the one who holds all authority. When faith is activated, the invisible chains lose their strength. Faith does not ignore the reality of bondage. It confronts it with a higher truth. The higher truth is that light always overcomes darkness, victory always overrides defeat, and freedom is always stronger than slavery. Faith does not wait for chains to be unlocked naturally. It speaks as though they are already broken. In that declaration, something shifts in the spirit. The same way a spoken word of faith can move mountains, it can also destroy the locks of bondage. Every person has invisible chains that try to hold them back, but every person also has the key of faith. Faith breaks the unseen grip of fear, dismantles the lies of the enemy, and opens the way to a life of freedom. It is not visible, yet it is the most powerful force, and when it arises within the heart, no chain, curse, or darkness can withstand its power. Salt is one of the most remarkable elements in creation because it carries both physical and spiritual meaning. Throughout history, salt has been more than just a seasoning. It has been a sign of purity, preservation, and covenant. In ancient times, people used salt to prevent food from decaying, and in the same way, it came to represent the power of preservation in the spiritual sense. It was a symbol that reminded humanity of divine purity and the ability of God to keep his people from corruption. Salt was also used in offerings, showing that it was considered holy and significant in worship, representing a covenant relationship that could not be broken. When you look deeper, salt has a way of teaching spiritual truths. Just as salt dissolves in water yet changes the entire flavor of the meal, the presence of spiritual salt in a believer's life transforms their environment in ways that may not be visible but are undeniable. Salt penetrates and influences whatever it touches, symbolizing how a life of faith influences everything around it. It purifies, it protects, and it leaves a lasting effect. Spiritually, this means that when faith is active, the believer becomes like salt, preventing decay in their family, society, and even in their own personal destiny. Salt is small in size, but its effect is powerful. And in the same way, spiritual symbols carry enormous meaning in the unseen realm. Salt also represents victory over corruption and evil. Just as salt prevents spoilage, it symbolizes the authority believers have to resist spiritual decay caused by sin, fear, or witchcraft. Evil thrives in environments that lack purity, but salt reminds us that purity is a weapon. When you lift salt in faith, it is not the salt itself that has the power, but the declaration that you are aligned with divine preservation. It is an outward sign of an inward reality. In this way, salt becomes a spiritual reminder that what God has purified cannot be corrupted, and what He has preserved cannot be destroyed. There is also a deeper symbolism in how salt creates thirst. When consumed, it awakens a longing for water, and spiritually, it reminds believers that their lives should awaken a thirst for truth, righteousness, and the presence of God in others. Salt is not just about protection, it is about influence. It influences taste, it influences desire, and it influences preservation. In the same way, spiritual salt influences the atmosphere, shifting situations from darkness to light, from chaos to order, from corruption to preservation. The power of salt as a symbol lies in its ability to remind us that God's promises are lasting. Just as salt never loses its essence, the covenant of God with His people is unshakable. It reassures that even in the presence of evil or witchcraft, preservation and purity will prevail. When a believer understands salt in this way, it is no longer an ordinary mineral, but a constant spiritual reminder that they are protected, preserved, and empowered to stand strong against all forms of darkness. Freezing evil by declaration is a powerful act of faith that demonstrates how words spoken with conviction can stop the movement of darkness in its tracks. Evil operates like a force that spreads silently, seeking to infiltrate the mind, the family, and even the future, but it can be restrained when confronted by spoken authority. Just as freezing water stops it from flowing and locks it in place, declaring with faith that evil is frozen renders it powerless and immobile. The spoken word has always held power in the spiritual realm. And when someone rises to declare with boldness that the plans of witchcraft, curses, and demonic attacks are frozen, those forces are immediately halted from advancing any further. There is great mystery in the authority of words, but it is no accident. Life and death are carried in the tongue, and the moment words of faith are released, they move into the unseen realm to establish reality. Evil cannot be ignored because silence allows it to keep spreading. But when a person speaks a declaration such as, "I freeze every evil plan against my life," the words go forth like a command, halting the activity of forces that cannot be seen with human eyes. This declaration is not about the sound of the voice, but about the authority carried in the Spirit. Faith adds fire to the words, and the combination of belief and declaration forms a barrier that evil cannot cross. Freezing evil is also about timing. Many people wait until damage is visible before reacting, but the strength of a declaration is that it goes ahead of time. By speaking boldly, a believer places a spiritual stop sign in the path of destruction before it even reaches them. This proactive act of freezing evil prevents it from gaining ground in their life. It is a shield of protection created not with physical weapons, but with spiritual authority. Just as a soldier must stand on guard at all times, the person who declares freezing of evil maintains a position of vigilance, ensuring that darkness cannot move unchecked. When this practice is understood, it becomes a way of life. Declarations are not one-time acts, but continual affirmations of victory. Evil does not rest, but faith-filled declarations ensure that it remains restrained. The words, I freeze every curse, every demonic plan, every hidden trap against me, are not empty statements. They are decrees that activate divine authority. These declarations speak to situations, to circumstances, and even to unseen powers, forcing them into stillness where they can do no harm. The image is one of fire being extinguished by ice, movement being stopped by sudden stillness, and threats being turned into harmless shadows with no strength left to strike. Freezing evil by declaration proves that faith is not passive but active. It is not a quiet hope but a bold announcement. It shows that the unseen world listens to the words of those who dare to believe. And once those words are spoken with conviction, darkness has no choice but to obey and remain frozen in defeat. The unseen realm obeys faith because faith is the language that carries authority in the spiritual dimension. There are realities that cannot be perceived with human eyes, yet they govern much of what happens in the physical world. These unseen realities include forces of light and forces of darkness, blessings and curses, angels and demons, and spiritual laws that are always at work even when unnoticed. Human strength, logic, or effort cannot control these forces, but faith has the ability to speak into that invisible arena and cause change. Faith is more than belief in the mind. It is an active trust that what is declared in alignment with divine truth will take shape in the spiritual world and manifest in the physical. When a person speaks words of faith, they are not simply speaking into the air. They are giving commands that the unseen realm recognizes and responds to. Every act of faith sets a law into motion that the spiritual world cannot ignore. Just as gravity governs the natural world and responds without fail, faith governs the unseen realm with the same certainty. Darkness trembles at genuine faith because it carries authority not from human power, but from the one who rules all creation. When faith is expressed, it carries divine backing, and the spiritual world aligns itself with those declarations. For example, when someone declares freedom, chains that were invisible but real begin to break. When someone prays with faith over sickness, healing is released from the spiritual realm into the body. The unseen must bow because faith is like a key that unlocks doors, shifts atmospheres, and calls things that do not exist into existence. The unseen realm is constantly watching for voices of authority. Fear also speaks, doubt also speaks, but they produce bondage and defeat. Faith, however, speaks with certainty and produces victory. What differentiates faith is its alignment with truth. while the unseen forces of darkness attempt to create illusions of fear, limitation, and destruction, faith breaks those illusions and enforces the reality of light, freedom, and life. It is like speaking into a storm and watching the winds calm, not because of natural ability, but because the spiritual world recognizes the authority of faith. This is why faith is never wasted. Even when circumstances look unchanged in the natural, something has already shifted in the invisible realm the moment faith was spoken. The unseen realm obeys faith because faith is rooted in eternal authority that cannot fail. Mountains, curses, witchcraft, and spiritual opposition are not moved by emotions or effort, but they cannot resist the force of faith. Faith creates a command that travels beyond what the eye can see, and every invisible barrier is forced to acknowledge it. The unseen realm has no choice but to bow when faith rises, because faith carries the power of heaven itself and ensures that victory in the spiritual translates into victory in the physical. Freedom comes through bold prayer, because prayer is not meant to be timid whispers of uncertainty, but strong declarations of faith that shake the unseen world. Bold prayer is an expression of confidence that chains can be broken, mountains can move, and spiritual atmospheres can shift. Many people pray with hesitation, as if unsure whether their words carry weight. But true freedom requires a kind of prayer that speaks with authority, knowing that the one who hears is greater than any power of darkness. When prayer rises from a heart that believes, it becomes like a hammer that smashes spiritual barriers and like fire that consumes the works of evil. Bold prayer does not beg, it commands. It does not fear, it declares. It does not retreat, it advances. This is why freedom flows from it, because bold prayer refuses to accept captivity as permanent and insists that liberty must come. Bold prayer carries the sound of conviction. When a person prays with boldness, they are not merely reciting words, but releasing faith-filled decrees into the spiritual realm. Every curse, every demonic trap, every invisible chain hears that authority and must bow. Freedom does not come by accident. It comes when someone dares to stand in the place of prayer and confront the forces that seek to hold them down. Boldness in prayer is like light breaking through darkness. It gives no space for evil to hide. Even witchcraft, curses, and generational patterns lose their grip when confronted by prayers that are filled with fire and certainty. Freedom comes because bold prayer is not rooted in human confidence, but in divine assurance. When you pray boldly, you are not depending on your strength, but on the strength of heaven. This alignment is what makes the prayer powerful. Timid words may leave the tongue, but they lack impact in the spirit. Bold words, however, move like arrows, striking the heart of the enemy and dismantling his works. In the act of bold prayer, fear is silenced, doubt is overcome, and faith rises as the ruling voice. Where fear says, "It cannot change," bold prayer declares, "It must change now." That unwavering tone of faith is what unlocks freedom, because the unseen realm obeys words of authority. Freedom is not only personal, but generational when birthed through bold prayer. Chains that held families for decades can be broken in one moment of strong intercession. Addictions that seemed unbreakable for years can be shattered by consistent, fiery prayer. Evil cannot resist when confronted by words drenched in faith and spoken with boldness. This is why bold prayer must become a lifestyle rather than an occasional act. It is the daily weapon that keeps evil frozen, witchcraft silenced, and curses powerless. Freedom comes because bold prayer shakes the foundations of darkness and establishes the reality of light, declaring that liberty belongs to those who believe enough to speak with fearless authority. Faith protects family and future because it builds an invisible shield that no weapon of darkness can penetrate. Families are constantly under attack in ways that are not always visible. Division, sickness, poverty, addiction, and generational curses try to infiltrate homes and weaken the foundation of future generations. Yet faith rises as a wall of protection, surrounding loved ones with divine covering. Faith declares that no harm will befall them, no plan of evil will succeed, and no curse will continue its cycle. When one person in a household stands in unwavering faith, it creates a spiritual hedge around the entire family. This is why the faith of parents, grandparents, and intercessors is so critical. Their prayers and declarations become like a fortress, ensuring that the family line is preserved for destiny and not destroyed by darkness. Faith works as a seed planted in the present that bears fruit in the future. What is spoken and believed today influences tomorrow. When someone declares with faith that their children will walk in light, succeed in life, and remain untouched by evil, those words enter the unseen realm and set the course of destiny. Faith is forward-looking. It does not only protect the current moment, but secures what lies ahead. Families often carry burdens from the past, broken marriages, generational addictions, financial struggles, but faith has the power to cut off what was and establish a new inheritance. Through faith, a future is rewritten, one filled with blessing instead of curse, abundance instead of lack, peace instead of turmoil. Faith protects because it creates alignment with divine promises. The family that walks in faith does not walk alone. They walk under the guidance and protection of heaven. When storms rise, faith declares calmness. When threats appear, faith proclaims safety. Children who grow up in an atmosphere of faith inherit not only prayers, but also the assurance that their lives are anchored in divine security. This becomes their foundation when they face their own challenges in the future. Faith carries forward, becoming a legacy that outlives the one who first believed. It passes down courage, strength, and conviction, shaping generations that know how to overcome. The future is always uncertain in human eyes, but faith secures it by anchoring it in what cannot fail. The unseen dangers that wait ahead cannot touch those who are covered by a faith-filled declaration. Even when evil attempts to rise years later, the prayers of faith spoken today still stand as a defense. Faith stretches across time, preserving destiny before it unfolds. It ensures that the blessings of today are not lost tomorrow, and it establishes that the family will not just survive, but thrive. In this way, faith is not only a shield for the present moment, but also a guardian of tomorrow, shaping a future where freedom, victory, and divine favor flow through the generations.